Now, today's title of the message is Unleashed. Carolyn, can you give me that? Let's look at today's scriptures. You don't have to stand, but today's scriptures can be found in Psalm 105, verse 15 through 20. And I believe if you really listen to this message, God is going to bless you. But I'm going to read it and you just follow along. It's the verses found in the recited word. Verse 15. He said to them, "Don't you dare lay a hand on my anointed ones, and don't you do a thing to hurt my prophets." So God decreed a famine upon Canaan land, cutting off their food supply. But he had already sent a man ahead of his people to Egypt. It was Joseph, who was sold as a slave. His feet were bruised by strong shackles, and his soul was held by iron. God's promise to Joseph purged his character until it was time for his dreams to come true. Final verse and the focal verse of this message. Eventually, the king of Egypt sent for him, setting him free at last. Today's message is entitled Unleashed. And so I'm going to ask you to pull out your smart devices or anything that you write with and grab something to write with and take some notes, because there's a message in this for you. Okay, so let's talk about Joseph. Most of you know who Joseph is. Joseph, we hear about Joseph in Genesis chapter 37 through 50. We hear about Joseph because Joseph went to prison. We heard these great stories about Joseph, but let me break it down to you. Basically, when we first run into Joseph, he was 17 years old. He was working on his father's farm, and his father Jacob is basically Israel. You heard the word Israel had 12 sons, and those 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, Israel had 12 sons. And Genesis is basically the story of all 12 of his sons. But in particular, there was a very important son that he had named Joseph. And so when we first find out about Joseph, he's 17 years old on the farm. Now, in Jewish custom, the oldest son is the one who gets the double portion of the inheritance, because it's up to him to take care of his brothers and sisters. Well, in this particular family, and I tell you, the Bible is like a soap opera. And part of me, because I got a bachelor's degree in biblical studies, but I kind of dig a little deep. Joseph's oldest brother was disqualified from being the chief son because he had an affair with his father's concubine. So that knocked him out. The other two brothers avenged their sister's rape and killed the whole city. So that knocked them out. The other half of his brothers were not born to his wife, Leah, or Rachel. They was born to concubines. So that knocked them out. And so leadership fell upon Joseph. And we hear in the story where the father gave him a coat of many colors. This coat was to symbolize that this is my son, he is going to be the leader, even though he was the youngest. And so what happened was his brothers got jealous of him. Now the Bible says that Joseph was a strong, tall, dark, handsome brother of color. We read throughout the Bible that he had presence. He had that it factor. But his brothers was jealous of him. So one day he went to his brothers and he told his brothers of a dream that he had. And that dream basically, to summarize, was he had a dream that he was going to be like a king and his brothers was going to be bowing down to him. Like, come on, man. We already got to listen to you because you're younger than us. And our father favors you more than us. Now you telling us that we're going to bow down to you? They got upset. So they hatched up this scheme to sell their brother into slavery. And what's interesting, if you really dig deep into that, you realize that Joseph was actually sold 5 times before he ended up in Egypt. When he ended up in Egypt, he learned a few things on his father's farm. So when he ended up in Egypt, he ended up at a man named Potiphar's house. And Potiphar was an Egyptian official, and he had a large estate. And he saw the it factor in Joseph, because Joseph was a hustler. Joseph made things happen. And he elevated him over his whole estate. So now you got an Egyptian, an Israelite running Egyptian's business. He's running his whole estate. The Bible says that Joseph was tall, dark, and handsome. Potiphar's wife liked him and said, hey, ain't you my slave? I can do with you what I want to do with you. And she wanted to have an affair with him. And Joseph had integrity and he wouldn't do it. So to save herself, she lied on Joseph and he ended up going to prison. But when he went to prison, because he was a hustler and he had high ethics and high integrity, he had that it factor. The warden of the prison made him over the whole prison, including the prisoners. So imagine you being a prisoner and the warden giving you the keys to the prison and trusting that you don't let yourself out. Long story short, he's in prison. He's telling he got the ability to interpret dreams. These two guys walk up to him. They're like, man, I heard you can interpret dreams. Man, I had this dream. Could you tell me what happened? He said, all right, one of y'all, when you get out, you're going to die. And the other one, when you get out, you're going to be business as usual. And surely, that's what happened. They both worked for the king. One got out. The king chopped off his head. The other one was the cupbearer. He kept being the cupbearer. But then, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, he's having these dreams, and he's like, man, I can't figure out this dream. It's perplexing. I'm paying all of you wizards and all you magistrates and all of that. Y'all can't interpret my dream. I need to interpret my dream. And the cupbearer remembers this guy who was in the joint with him interpreting dreams. And so he goes and he asks Joseph, he said, hey man, look, if you can come up here and you can interpret the Pharaoh's dream, you might be able to get a parole, man. He said, all right, cool. So he went up there, and the king told him the dream, and he interpreted the dream. And he basically said, what your dreaming is about, man, is that you're going to have 7 years of prosperity, and then after that, you're going to have 7 years of famine. And he said, what you need to do is, during the 7 years of prosperity, you need to save up for the 7 years of famine. That way, when the famine happens, you can take care of your business and you won't be lack. He said, oh man, that's a good idea. He said, you just need to find somebody to do that for you. He said, all right, since you got all the great ideas, why don't you do it? Yeah. You see, Joseph was great before he met the Pharaoh. Yes. It was because he was great that he made it to the palace. Joseph was great, so kings wrote about him. And so in Psalms chapter 105, what we're reading now, this is actually King David writing about the greatness of Joseph. Look at verse 15. The Bible says, he said to them, don't you dare lay a hand on my anointed ones, and don't you do a thing to hurt my prophets. Oftentimes when this verse is recited, people use it in reference to telling people not to handle the man of God a certain way. They say, don't put your hands on my anointed. Don't do nothing to hurt my prophet. But see, this particular viewpoint only captures the perspective of someone else laying a hand on the anointed. But what if the anointed lays a hand on themselves? What if it's you who are hurting you? What I'm talking about is self-sabotage. That monkey wrench that we always seem to throw. That thing that we do to always get in our own way. What if it's you who are laying hands on your own anointed selves? What if it's you who are hurting your own chances because you keep getting in your own way? You might not be making the same choices, but you're making similar choices. Visiting similar places, ending up in similar situations, going around and around looking for a path that's straight. Right. Hanging with people who have plateaued and you're still rising, getting advice from people with GEDs and you got a doctorate degree. Maybe it's you who are afraid to leave the comforts of your contentment and journey into the galaxy of your greatness. Yeah. Maybe it's you who are laying the hands on the anointed. Look at verse 16 and verse 17. So God decreed a famine upon Canaan land, cutting off their food supply. But he had already sent a man ahead of his people to Egypt. It was Joseph who was sold as a slave. It says that God decreed a famine. God decreed a famine. What's a famine? Dryness, death, scarcity, drought, lack, deprivation, deficiency, exhaustion. It says God decreed a famine. And so whenever you read, and remember I got degrees in reading the Bible basically. Whenever you read the Bible and you see the word Egypt, if it's not talking about the country, it's usually talking about bondage. Because the children of Israel was in Egypt for 400 years as slaves. Right. So he's basically saying that there's dryness in places of bondage. If you look over your life and see areas that are dry, then there's probably bondage in that area. Right. There's always a lack of resources in places of bondage. When you're held captive, it's impossible to do what you like to do. Why? Because you're a slave. And slaves can't just pick up and go where they want to go. They can't just be what they want to be. They just can't do what they want to do. Right. Continue to look at that verse. So he says that he decreed a famine, but he had already sent a man. Mm-hmm. So God decrees a global famine years before it happens, and then sends Joseph through slavery and prison to prepare him for it. Yeah. What does this mean? It means that Joseph had a purpose. Just like you and I, Joseph had a purpose, and part of God's purpose for Joseph was for him to go through the pit, the prison, and the palace. You see, God divinely orchestrates every aspect of your life to prepare you for your purpose. The Bible says that God revealed Joseph's purpose to him through a dream, and then he used everything Joseph goes through to prepare him for what he dreamed. Right. You see, despite how Joseph may have been feeling at the moment, he was still mobile. Despite his predicament, he still performed, and it was through his performance that God placed favor on him. Yes. In fact, it was when he did something that we see in Genesis chapter 39, and I quote, the Bible says, when Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph and how the Lord caused all that Joseph did to prosper in his hand, Potiphar put him in charge of everything he owned. What does that mean? It means that even though Joseph was in bondage, he still was working. Yes. He worked through what he was going through. And some scholars say that it was his integrity and his work ethic that got Potiphar's attention and put him in position to elevate. Yes. It was his integrity and his work ethic that got the warden's attention and put him in position to elevate. Bible scholars say that Joseph's work ethic and integrity put him in front of the Pharaoh and he elevated. Right. So what's the lesson? What Joseph learned in one season of his life, God used in the next season. Yeah. Right. Joseph didn't sit back and wait for something to happen. He got up and made something happen. It was when he made something happen that God blessed everything he touched. Oh, yes. For example, when he was a slave in Egypt, working for Potiphar, he made something happen. God elevated him. When he was innocent and in prison, he made something happen. God blessed him. Write this down. Yeah. When the enemy knows that God has a higher purpose for your life, he attempts to bind you. Yeah, come on. When the enemy knows that God has a higher purpose for your life, he attempts to bind you. And how does he do that? The answer can be found in the very next verse. Look at verse 18. It says, his feet were bruised by strong shackles, and his soul was held by iron. A couple years ago, I taught a study, a mental health study, and I gave the definition of the soul. I said there's a difference between the soul and the spirit. There's a difference. Your spirit comes from God. Your soul is you. Your soul is everything that makes you you. Your soul is your will, your intellect, your personality, your feelings, your emotions, your creativity. Everything that makes you you, that's your soul. And I don't know about you, and I pray nobody's been in this situation, but I have. When the police put shackles on your feet, that means they don't want you to go nowhere. Right. They can put them on your wrists, you can still move your legs. Yeah. But they put shackles on your feet, that means they don't want you to go nowhere. That's good. And what is iron? It's the things that's binding them. You see, you are a creative person, but for whatever reason, you just can't create. For whatever reason, you can't focus on the things you should. And so now you're left with a feeling of, I know I'm supposed to be doing something, but I just can't put my finger on it. I know I'm supposed to be doing something, but I just can't pull myself to do it. You see, he has your soul held in iron. Your feet in shackles. The enemy puts your feet in shackles. And what that means is he don't want you to go nowhere. Now you're not moving because you're shackled to insecurity, shackled to fear, shackled to disappointment, rejection, abuse, shackled to grief, shackled to poor decisions, shackled to the past, shackled to whatever iron the enemy uses to hold your soul.
Wow, come on.
So his feet was bruised by strong shackles, and his soul was held by iron. Look at verse 19. God's promise to Joseph purged his character until it was time for his dreams to come true. Let me repeat that. God's promise to Joseph purged his character until it was time for his dreams to come true. Let me say it one more time. God's promise to Joseph purged his character until it was time for his dreams to come true. You see, God was faithful to his promises to Joseph and was perfecting his character and preparing him and purging him until it was time for him to actualize the dream that he had given him. You see, Joseph learned from every situation that he was in. And when he found himself in a different situation, he applied the skills he learned in that previous situation to the new one. That's how God perfected his character. Joseph learned how to count his father's cattle when he was 17 and applied those accounting skills to Potiphar's estate. Joseph took what he learned from the estate and ran the warden's prison. It was what he learned on the farm, in the pit, in the estate, and in the prison that prepared him to run all of Egypt. What am I saying to you? You are the sum total of everything that has happened in your life. And despite all that, you have everything it takes to be what God has called you to be. All the trials, all the troubles, all the trauma, all the tribulation, all the tears, all the time wasted. It has purged your character for the next level. Now God can trust you with more because you're used to having less. He can trust you with love because you're finally over the sex of the ex.
Come on.
Now God can trust you with that job because you've shown the capacity to keep it. Now God can trust you with a family because you know all too well about a broken one. God says he's purged Joseph's character until his dreams came true. Final verse, we almost up out of here. See, look at y'all. Y'all be real good in class. I can get you right on up out of here. But I ain't going to go so fast that you don't get what I'm saying. Verse 20. This message is based off of this verse. Eventually. What does eventually mean? In time. The king of Egypt sent for him, setting him free at last. Just like Joseph, you are unleashed to use all your gifts, experiences, and knowledge. You are released from confinement and unleashed to be all God created you to be. You are unleashed from other people's judgment, expectations, and opinions. You are unleashed into your community to make a difference. Unleashed into your family to reverse the curse. Unleashed into the marketplace to make a profit. You are free from boundaries and limitations. God says that you are unleashed from every weight and released from all the pressure. God has said that he releases you and he's empowering you to be great in his name. God has unleashed you to do good things. He's unleashed you to build his kingdom, unleashed you to fulfill the dreams he gave you, released you to find love again, released you from all the negative stuff that has impacted your life. God has unleashed you for a higher purpose. God says that you are anointed and chosen and favored and created for a purpose. And that you're still here for a reason. And God says that he's unleashing you. And so hear the word of the Lord.
Hallelujah. Unleashed.
God says there's no need to wait for extra confirmation from God to reassure you that you are good enough or ready for what God has in store for you.
Come on now.
He says you will never fully be ready for what God has for you. He says that even though he has unleashed you, some of you chose to still be bound.
Yeah.
He says that the famine in your life is over, so you don't have to live like you're in famine anymore.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
God says that your breakthrough can only occur if you break out. He says, break out of your self-imposed prison and shackles that no one can see and feel but you. He says that if you make the decision to start now, that just like Joseph, you can expect an elevation.
All right. Yes.
The Lord says that you are unleashed. Unleashed to be all that you were created to be. None of your situations, none of your circumstances, not your past, not your education, not your pedigree, not your family, not your love life. God said he created you to be all he created you to be.
Yes.
He says all of us are individuals. None of us are the same.
No.
None of us have the same DNA, the same iris, the same fingerprints. God says he created you uniquely for a purpose.
Yes.
And he's unleashing you to pursue it. No one is stopping us but us.
All right.
If this message was a blessing, you give God a round of applause. Amen. Amen.